So my name is Rachel Botha, and I'm the curator of the public art program in the Tea House in Kilkenny. It's a new space, and we're in a very old building, but it's exciting because there's like a new art program being kind of developed, and hopefully we'll be here for a while as well. So it's founded and initiated by the Kilkenny Arts Office. One of the exhibition that's on at the moment is Toil and Moil, and it's by Emma Swan. Emma Swan is joining us today. She's in the group, and Emma's work looks at the Henry Ford assembly line, which was introduced in 1913 and revolutionized industry, manufacturing, and society as well, and looks at labor and time and its prevailing influence today as well. And I suppose when we're thinking about labor, time, and workers' conditions, we also need to think about resistance, strike action, and global protest. And this is where the Celebrate People's History posters come in. Emma and I selected 18 from 200 posters, which are shown behind us here. I first came across the posters at the Create Summer School, and they're borrowed from Kate O'Shea, who's an amazing artist and organizer. This evening, I'm going to pass it on to Josh. We're going to have a Q&A at the end. But Josh McPhee here, he started the project in 1998, and it's just been going ever since, and it's pretty incredible. So Josh, I'm going to pass it on to you, and I'll make you co-host now. Okay, there you go.
Okay. Welcome everyone. My name is Josh McPhee. I use he, him pronouns. I live in Brooklyn, New York, and I have been doing organizing the Celebrate People's History poster now for over 25 years. So I feel like it's like half my life has been in part following the path of the creation and distribution of these posters. Um, I'm gonna do a short presentation, and then maybe there'll be some time, and hopefully people will have some questions or comments or thoughts, and we can have a little talk. So let me see if I can share my screen. Um, where is, let's see, share screen. Here we go. Do people see the presentation? Okay, because I don't. So, um, okay. And it's full screen. It's not like you can't see my screen as well.
We see like the top, like the
Huh.
browser,
Okay. Okay, let's see if we can.
full screen.
Yeah, it's weird. Um, Let me see if I can fix that. Sorry. Sorry for the technical difficulties. Wait. Now let's see if this works. It's weird. It's not.
Oh yeah.
Is that better?
You can still see the top of the browser.
So weird.
Just
Okay,
that.
well, I'm just gonna go with this.
Okay.
So like Rachel said, I started organizing these posters in 1998. And before I sort of get into the specifics, I'm gonna give a little bit of the background of my thinking around why I've invested so much time and energy and capital and part of my life to this project. And basically, in thinking about the life that we live and the society that we live in, and thinking of, I've spent a lot of time thinking about how one of the main, you know, capitalism has many ideological tools, but one of its main tools is control of time and our sense of time. And one of the ways that I think that that works is that we're presented with the idea that we're always in the present is monolithic, that what we live in now is exactly the way it's always been, and it is exactly the way it will be moving forward, which creates a sense that nothing can ever change. Because we're always focused in being right now, then of course that's just all there is. And so we end up in this weird funhouse mirror reality in which any direction that we look, we just see versions of where we are now and what we are now. And this gets promoted in all kinds of things. It's so dominant in advertising, and you get advertisements like this, in which we look back to the Neolithic age and people are getting carjacked. Um, and then we look forward, whether that's in the 1950s, in which we can imagine that air conditioning is something that is individualized, and we bring our own personal air conditioner onto any form of transit. Um, and then more contemporary, this diesel gene ad, where there's an acknowledgement that the result of personal air conditioning is that we live in a planet that's barely inhabitable, but we have cool pants, and so it doesn't really matter. Um, and I think that part of the like this just without even thinking about it, I mean, we're literally seeing at this point with social media millions of images a day. And those images carry immense amounts of ideological baggage. And we're not given a lot of tools to unpack them. And so we sort of carry this with us. And one of the things that I really love about history is that it's such a simple tool. It's this wedge that sort of slams into the present and creates this understanding that, wait a second, things have been different. And if we can recognize that things have been different, then we can see that they can be different again. And so it opens up this sense of possibility. And so this project really came out of an attempt to try to take this, philosophical insight in a way and materialize it, programatize it. And and of course this is a sort of theoretical apparatus that exists in physical space, in the material condition of our lives, which is that we're in spaces that we're being bombarded by both advertising on the one hand and sort of corporate directives, and then signage that are dictating state directives, statecraft and governance. Do this, go here, don't do that, do this, buy this. Um, and it's just sort of an endless barrage of from above. And at the time in the 90s when I started conceptualizing and thinking about doing this project, I was doing a lot of street art. And so I was looking at the street and seeing that everything on the street was top down and was not particularly generous and treated people basically like they were idiots. And so I started to think about what would it mean? How would I put something out on the street that, you know, gave people a little bit more to chew on. This also was in a moment in which street art was becoming massively both popularized and corporatized. So I don't even remember when this was, but Oxygen, which is Oprah Winfrey's television channel, did a reality TV show, Street Art Throwdown. So street art itself was being corporatized. Um, so in that context, I, at the time, was living in Chicago, in the middle of the US, and my roommate was a Chicago public school teacher. Um, and so I was working on the street, doing a lot of stencil work and wheat pasting, and trying to sort of puzzle through how to put something up that actually felt like it was meaningful rather than just another advertisement. And she was in a classroom, in the mid 90s, on the south side of Chicago, and really struggling with the fact that at the time there was very, very little that she could find to put up in her class that represented the histories, and experiences of her students. So for people that don't know, the south side of Chicago historically and still to this day is predominantly Black and Latinx, working class communities. And so there was just very little material at the time that spoke to her students. And so we came up with this idea of doing a poster about Malcolm X. And you can see here the sort of initial sketches, and then I made a block print and hand did this typography. And then my roommate Liz found this quote. It's actually not a quote, it's sort of a paraphrase from Malcolm X. Armed with the knowledge of our past, we can charter a course for our future. Only by knowing where we've been can we know where we are and look to where we want to go. So in a way, this basically became the motto of this poster series, that we need to know where we've been in order to know where we want to go. And we printed a couple thousand of this poster, and then some friends of mine that grew up on the south and west sides of Chicago, we went down there in the middle of the night and we pasted them up all over the street. Um, and this kind of amazing thing happened that really transformed my life, which is that up until that point, I had been doing street art and graffiti entirely surreptitiously. I would go out at 2 in the morning. I would wear all black. Um, we would have a team of people. We'd have lookouts, and we would. The goal was to put something up and be gone before anyone realized we were there. So when we went to put these out, we were a big crew of people and there was a lot more street life. We went out earlier and people started coming up to us and going, "What are you putting up? What is that?" "Oh, Malcolm X. I love Malcolm X." "Oh, can I have one for my kid?" "Oh, can I help you put them up?" It was the first time that I had done any kind of street art where the response was not, "This is criminal," but instead, "This is cool. I want to participate." People were literally sort of pulling the buckets of weed paste out of our hands and wanting to help put the posters up. Um, and so that launched into basically a number of years of going out in cities all over the US and also in other countries and putting them up in the middle of the day. Um, and sort of encouraging interaction with bystanders. And so this starts, in the late 90s and the early 2000s. So it's hard to remember. And for some of you, maybe you weren't even really aware that, because you're so young, but this is before the internet as we know it. So when I started this project, there was no website. Um, After maybe the first couple posters, I had an email address. And so I started putting an email address on these posters. And at the time, this kind of feedback loop was totally novel. There wasn't, we didn't live in the same kind of attention economy that we live in now, in which we're being asked for our opinion about everything all the time. So these went up all over, and I started getting emails from people. What are these posters? What is this about? People were arguing about the historical narratives that were presented on the posters. I'm a high school history teacher, and I totally disagree with this poster. And this kind of discussion about history started happening that was fascinating. That was not happening at the time around sort of more monumental representations of history. So, you would see a statue of a guy on a horse with a saber in the air, and everyone just walks past it. No one thinks twice about it. And this instead was this sort of intervention that was not quite advertising, not quite signage, had a little bit too much information on it to make a lot of sense. So people sort of gravitated towards it, couldn't figure out what it was, and started engaging. And so that created this ongoing process of putting these posters up more and more, spreading the word, started sending out envelopes of posters to anyone that would put them up. It started getting up and being put up all over the world. At the same time, through initially Liz and then through other channels, educators started getting their hands on these because there was almost no access to information, materials for and curriculum around more political history, at least in the US at the time. And so these posters started getting popularized with educators and brought into classrooms and built and put into curriculum. And so here on the left, you have two young students at the Young Women's Empowerment Academy in Chicago looking at posters, preparing for a unit to make their own posters about the people's history that was important in their communities. And then on the right, here's some posters up in the halls of a high school in Milwaukee. It's a city also in the Midwest here in the US. Um, I started tabling and selling posters at curriculum fairs and trying to get them out to educators. And that's been extremely successful, both to the extent that I got an email maybe 3 or 4 years ago from a film company that wanted to clear the rights for a bunch of these posters because they were doing a film about this young woman in Connecticut who had been named the Teacher of the Year in the United States. And they were filming B-roll in the classroom, and her classroom was covered with these posters. And so they couldn't use them in the film unless they cleared the rights. And then the other amazing thing that's happened is that lots and lots of educators have been having students make posters. And so oftentimes I'll get these emails or even packages in the mail of these posters that are being made by students, everywhere from middle school kids, so kids that are 12, 13, 14, up to, undergrads in university. And increasingly, I mean, the posters are getting really great, and a number of them have been produced in as part of the actual series at this point. This is a very loud, short little clip of these posters being printed. And so one of the things that I think is important to talk about in the context of um oops, I don't there is the posters is that we live in this age of digital reproduction, but these posters are all still offset printed. So they're printed in the way that historically books have been printed or newspapers. They're printed on a massive press. And so most of the posters at this point are printed in anywhere from 1,000 to 2,000 copies in the initial print run. And some of them have been reprinted 4, 5, 6 times. And so there's now 200 posters that have been printed, um, a minimum of 1,000, probably at this point, an average of about 2,000 copies of each. So we're talking about 500,000 of these posters that have been out in the world. And so these are pallets of posters being delivered to Just Seeds Artist Cooperative, which I'm a part of and is the primary distributor of the posters. And so when I started, you can see here on the left, this is the first flyer that I made that was selling a subscription to the posters. So I was sending them to people in the mail. So I've never gotten a grant for this. The posters have always been self-funding. So the printing of the posters is paid by the selling of the previous posters printed. Um, and when I started, I was selling them for $2 each, $2 US. And now they sell for $6 US, which is still extremely cheap, because I don't want there to be much of a barrier for people to access them. Um, and so I started doing a subscription, and you can see there isn't even an email address or a website on this flyer. There's just a PO box. So this is like right, just before kind of the internet explosion. And then increasingly, I started getting contacted by stores that wanted to sell them. And so you see here on the right, this is the display of the posters at a store here in New York City called Quimby's. Just like a zine shop and bookshop that has all the posters for sale. Um, and so far, the series has been entirely self-funded. I've gotten small amounts of money here and there from exhibitions and things like that. And that money all gets folded right into printing more posters. Here's some flyers from some of the exhibitions over the years, um, in Tokyo, here in the US, in Montreal. And the posters have been displayed everywhere from museums to university galleries to community centers, labor union halls. They've been put up on the fences outside of protest occupations. They've really sort of circulated in all of these different ways. And one of the things from the beginning and one of the goals was really to sort of make these popular, to use these as a tool to give people access to their own histories. So, all of the posters are 11 by 17 inches. When I originally started, they were all two colors. It's now become cheaper to print in full color than two color, so that's changed. But um, a limited color palette, 11 by 17, vertical or portrait orientation. And then it's been up to the artist or the designer to decide what they want to make a poster about, and then to write the text and to research it and to create the design. So I don't dictate any of that. So when I started, I made the first poster, and then I started inviting other people. And anytime I meet someone who seems like they might be interested, I say, hey, if you ever want to make a poster, it's up to you. It's an open rolling deadline. Um, and and in that way, as much as the posters are about history, in a way, they're also really about historiography. Like, how do we understand history? Who gets to write it? Who gets to say what history is? Who gets to say what's important enough to be called history? And so, in their own small way, these posters really are an argument that history can and should be in the hands of everyone, that we can all participate in writing our own histories and writing our community's histories and taking things that have been suppressed by the status quo and dominant understandings of how the world works, and then raise those up and put those back out into the world as tools to give people ideas of how they can move things forward again and sort of create this cycle of using the past to open up possibilities into the future. It's just a nice wall of the posters. I don't even remember where this is. And it's interesting because the posters, even though we now live in the age of digital creation and reproduction, a lot of the posters are still produced in ways that are relatively analog and manual. Whoops. Um, so this is the one of the early posters that I did that was for John Brown, which started as a stencil. And then I used stamped letters and cut them out and then assembled an image, assembled two images actually, the image for the red and the image for the black, and those get shot on film, and then that film is used to burn aluminum plates, and those plates are put on a press, and then it's printed. So there's still a lot of traditional printmaking that goes into some of these posters. And then these are images of a poster that was in part designed. I mean, it was designed by a man named Mark Court, who at the time was in the Montgomery Federal Prison Camp, which is a federal prison in Alabama here in the United States. So he drew this poster from his cell, and then you can see these sort of folds on the design. It was sent out in the mail in pieces and then reassembled. And then I used that to scan in and make the finished poster that you see on the right. So all different kinds of people have done these posters, from people that are sitting in a cell to high school students who've done posters, and then I've had them printed. And one of the things that's really nice about the series when you see them all up on the wall is that you have things that are for the only mass-produced piece of art or culture that someone's ever made, next to pieces that are made by artists that have successful gallery careers. And oftentimes it's hard to tell the difference. And that people end up gravitating to the more amateur made posters than the ones that are much more professional. And that's always sort of, I find fascinating and interesting to see who leans towards what designs and what speaks to different people, and that all the posters really have their own audiences. Um, there are ones that I think largely because of their subject matter are way more popular than others. But one of the things that's nice about the series is that those more popular posters pay for the posters that are less popular. So there's a sort of a internal communism that works, where there's a kind of from each according to ability to each according to need. So, people really love Octavia Butler, Black feminist sci-fi author. Yeah, but right above your head, Rachel. So like, I mean, that poster I think was originally printed in 2019 and it's gone. I think I've had to reprint it 4 or 5 times. It's probably sold, I don't know, 10, 12,000 copies. And that pays for posters about historical things that are much harder to convince people are important. Um, and then maybe 5 years from now, those other things will be the hot popular thing, and they'll pay for other stuff, and sort of pay it forward. And I basically try to use every opportunity to get these up in all different ways and possibilities. And so this is a project that was in Pittsburgh, again here in the U.S. Called Sidewalls, which was a sort of 4x8 mini mural site on the side of a apartment building that uh, gave me the opportunity to make these giant 4 foot by 8 foot versions of the posters and have them up in public space, each for a month at a time, for a number of years. And this other fascinating thing has happened where a lot of the posters are of historical movements, moments, and people that there's actually not a lot of documentation of. And so they've become kind of stand-ins for the cultural productions of the movements themselves. And so you get these interesting kind of ripple effects where you have this is a mural about people's history that has paintings of the posters in the mural as representations of history. Uh, there's a number of posters like a one behind you, Rachel, the ADAPT one about the disability rights movement here in the US. Um, they they didn't make a lot of agitprop. They did a lot of actions, but there isn't a lot of material culture that came out of that initial movement. And so that poster in a way has become a stand-in for the movement. And more often than not, people think that it's a poster that was produced in the 1970s as part of that movement, which is an interesting thing that I didn't expect was going to happen. Is this sort of collapse of history and the representations of history. There was a period in the early 2000s where these became ubiquitous as part of kind of alternative youth culture. And so they started showing up in things like this New York Times article about kids going off to college and facing challenges with mental illness. And sort of this photo as this young person in their dorm room, and their dorm room is decorated with people's history posters. And so there started to be all these sort of ancillary, interesting press things where people would send me a message and say, I saw people's history in the background on the news the other day, or there was one in my local paper because there was a photo about this totally other thing. And they just kind of have seeped into culture here in a way. Um, it's another, and one of the things that's come out of the project is a number of book projects. And so I've worked with the Feminist Press here in the US to do 2 editions of a book that documents all of the posters. And then this is another way to get these images out into the world, to give them a little bit of context, and to spread the images and the politics. And then the book has also been translated into Korean and was published in Korea as well. And the book has some front matter by authors that are very well known in their own right, like Rebecca Solnit, and then Charlene Carruthers is a really important community organizer here in the U.S. and figure out how to there. And then these are three of the posters that I actually sent to print this morning. uh and so the journey continues. So we've got Bangladeshi garment workers movement, the poster about Beatrice Nascimento, who's one of the most important Afro feminists in Brazil. And then the uprisings in the Paris suburbs in the early 2000s. So increasingly, the posters are also very international, and the artists that are designing them are also international. A lot of the posters increasingly are now in multilingual and really sort of like are part of the sort of collapse of geography that the internet helps to facilitate. So it's much more easier to work with and coordinate with people all over the world. And all the posters are available on justseeds.org /CPH. There's a not super used Instagram account that I kind of fell off on, and then my Instagram at the bottom there, which I do upkeep more often and post all of the new posters and information about exhibitions and celebrate people's history events and such. So, yeah, that's the series. Thanks for listening. Uh, I'll um I'll jump off the shared screen and then I don't know. It'd be great if anyone has any thoughts, comments, complaints.
Amazing. Josh, thank you so much. It's like so amazing to get such an insight into such a long project. Like it's been so much time and it's really grown and developed and like it's still like running and like the steam is just like keeping it going and pretty amazing to hear you talk about like the international of it and it like growing in that way as well and that it's like come to Ireland and that we're able to like see it in the flesh as well and that like this is here for a moment of time but then it'll go back to Kate and it'll go to somebody else in a very different context in a very different format like maybe not an exhibition space but like a community hall or something like that.
Yeah, they're cheap and easy to
Mm.
travel. So they really have moved, which has been really nice because they're not precious. The point was never to make art objects.
Yeah.